Hello, everybody. Teri Barr here, joining you with the brand new PennyWise podcast. And of course, it's a new year and we have a new president. And I'm so thrilled to welcome as one of our very first guests, we have Taylor Tepper. Taylor is going to fill us in on what we need to be watching as we go 100 days forward. Taylor's also going to take us a little bit backwards to see what we can learn from that. Taylor is investing and retirement analyst with Forbes advisor. Taylor, we are so thrilled to have you here.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, thank you. You know, I find this really interesting because you did write the 100 days of six presidents. Now, while this had to be such an interesting story to do a little bit of history and digging on, I want to start in the future, I guess, and maybe even in the current days to see. We're watching President Biden and his administration do so much work right now. What should we, as people that are worried about maybe our money or where it's going in the next days, what should we be watching for right now, Taylor?
Sure. And thanks again for having us on. I think you should be watching for this phenomenon that economists and wonky types refer to as the K-shaped recovery. So the K-shaped recovery is, imagine an actual K. And so on the downward slope of the K, you have people who are really struggling. You have people who have lost their jobs, who haven't been able to find work, who need to be in person. Chairman Powell was just on his press conference talking about, hotel workers and restaurant workers. These people can't work and they are struggling and they're dependent upon financial aid from the government to keep their lives going. They've lost their jobs. There's a pandemic, and so they are the ones who are struggling. Everyone, a lot of other people have been able to keep their jobs. They are on the upward slope of the K. So these are people who have been able to, sort of seamlessly work remotely. Obviously, it's hard when I have two small kids. It's hard with kids, but your worries are more about convenience than about actually putting money in the bank and food on the table. And they have been able to sort of stay employed during this time period. They've been able to take advantage of low interest rates by buying homes or maybe even restructuring some debt. So I think the big economic phenomenon, big picture thing to look at is how are these two different groups, the two Americas, how are they performing over the next 100 years? And when you look at sort of economic metrics, you can look at how sort of low wage growth is growing. You can look at, lower income employment. Usually people who have, college degrees have been able to keep their jobs and work remotely. People who more blue collar jobs with less education have been bearing the brunt of these lockdowns. So you can watch those sort of metrics as the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts those out each month. And I think that is sort of like at least in the immediate term, that's the big thing to look out for. And obviously, President Biden is trying to pass a bunch of legislation and using executive actions such as they are to boost the advantages of people who are struggling.
Right. I think the one thing we noticed, the first stimulus that many people received, and then a second stimulus. Now there's talk of a third stimulus. Do you think many people are actually using the stimulus money to put it back into the economy in the way that I think both the Trump administration and now the Biden administration hopes we would, or are we hanging on to that cash?
Right. So it's very interesting. It depends on who you are. So to go back to the initial CARES Act, which happened in March, that was like 2.2 trillion, and then we had in December a $900 billion bailout, and those are both astronomical legislative achievements. Those were a lot of money put directly into the pockets of people who are struggling. If you were unemployed, you got $600 in extra federal assistance for your unemployment checks. Now it's about half that. If you made under a certain amount of money, you got these big stimulus checks, depending on how big your family were. This helped people sort of who were in a cash crunch build up savings, build up a little bit of armor as this was going on, and you know, keep the lights on. So to answer your question though, like there is research on this, and it shows that sort of what you would think, that the people who are sort of lower income, who have lost their jobs, they use these checks to and higher unemployment insurance. They use that they spend that on food, on services, on medicine, on, you know, things to make life enjoyable, TV, whatever. They spend the money, and that's good. We want them to spend the money. Your spending is my income, and that's great. The people who sort of are on the upward slope of the K, who still receive some federal benefits, you know, like an information work, like a family of 4 with an adjusted gross income of about $140,000, they're solidly upper middle class, depending on where they are in the country, and they received all of those stimulus checks. Now, those people are spending less money. Those people are saving their money because they have less demand. They have less need to spend the money. It sort of goes into their savings accounts. And what that has sort of resulted in is there's this huge amount of money. You know, economists sort of differ on how much it is. It could be 600 billion, a trillion, you know, who knows, but a huge amount of money just sort of sitting on the sidelines, waiting to be utilized once we're allowed to sort of use it, once we're allowed to go out to restaurants, you know, when it's sort of fun to do so, or go out on cruises and hotels and sort of get back to life. So I think the hope is that once the vaccines really kick in, once you know, that sort of herd immunity is met and life gets back to normal, it will be a pretty quick transition to the economy where it was before the recession and the pandemic, which was a very, very good economy. It was, yeah. Low incomes were growing pretty rapidly, much more rapidly than they had been previously, earlier on in the aftermath of the Great Recession. You know, the Fed was letting things burn a little brighter, which was really helped those low income workers. So things were going well, and I think the hope is, at least, that once we get to a certain number of, you know, vaccinations, we'll get back to that.
Oh, that sounds wonderful, and it makes sense. It really does. So for I'm talking with Taylor Tepper, and Taylor is investing retirement analyst with Forbes Advisor. Now, I guess I want to go backwards. I love this story you wrote. We're going to include links to it. You know, 100 days of 6 other presidents. This fascinates me, how we really can look backwards to figure out what's going to happen. What did you find, and what can we learn from what you found?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm susceptible to flattery, so I really appreciate you liking the piece.
Great.
Yeah, so I think the reason I wanted to do that piece was because obviously Biden isn't the first president to come into office when things are a little soupy, and it was sort of interesting to go back in time to see what were like the big things, what was like the one economic indicator you could look at these various past presidencies that help tell the story of that presidency, such as it is. So, you know, it depends on which president you want to go to, but like for FDR, for instance, you know, he came into office. Yeah.
This is
you know, you can't go wrong with FDR. Came into office, you know, in a very bad place. The economy in a much worse place than we are now. There was a huge Great Depression going on. People were scared to keep their money in the banks. You know, think about It's a Wonderful Life, you know, Bailey getting on top of the desk telling people to not take their money out. There were bank runs. People did not have confidence that they'd be able to access their money. It was a complete breakdown of the financial system. And so one of his chief jobs was to, you know, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, to build up the confidence of the American consumer household that the financial system isn't going to explode, that things are going to be fine. So he did a big bank holiday and this and that, and, you know, really talked to people through these fireside chats, did a whole bunch of policies to, you know, he's the one who sort of created the first 100 days as a thing. And so for that one, we sort of looked at how the Dow Jones Industrial Average rebounded as he came into office. But different presidents have had different issues. You know, Ford came into office when a period of super high inflation. You know, not only was Nixon out in disgrace, and the country was feeling, low, morale-wise, but inflation was really high. There was this big oil shock. That was one of the defining elements of his presidency. He tried to do these sort of funny, newfangled things like create these buttons that people could buy, and these people could be, they were win buttons, and people could be inflation fighters, and it was a little hokey and complete failure. We went to Reagan, and Reagan dealt with something similar. There was a big energy crisis after all the stuff that was going on with Iran, and so he had to deal with that, and so that was sort of the thing that we looked at. With Bush, the second President Bush came into office, he was dealing with a tech bubble bursting. Right. The Nasdaq was in free fall. Nasdaq took close to 15 years, depending on how you look at it, to recover, and that was there's a recession going on shortly after the 100 days. There was 9/11, so there was this recession going on, and then obviously Obama came into office during the second worst financial crisis of our history.
Horrible.
Yeah, horrible. And people were underwater on their homes.
Right.
They couldn't refinance. It took forever for the economy to slowly recover. The amount of stimulus we did back then pales into comparison to what we've done now.
Yeah.
And so for Obama, we looked at the unemployment rate and how slowly it took to actually get down. And so those were sort of the presidents who came in during crisis. And then just for comparison's sake, we looked at Trump, because he was the most recent president, obviously, before Biden. And with Trump, he came into a healthy, recovering economy, not an exploding economy, but a healthy economy. And the economy was doing relatively well. But the thing we looked at with him was, funnily enough, the price of Bitcoin, which has sort of exploded during this time. People are much more willing, it seems, to take bets and risks on and speculative gambles on these newfangled financial securities or assets. And as we speak right now, GameStop has skyrocketed in price.
Bring that up, yeah.
Yeah, and it was about a year ago, it was worth 300 million. And now, depending on, as we're talking, it's worth $30 billion. Last time I checked this morning was $25 billion, but it could have obviously gone up, or it's probably gone up since then. So there's been
that just the ability for people to try different things and not be scared.
Yeah. So I think, so like there's a joke, this is sort of like GameStop is launching 1,000 takes. Like everyone is sort of using that to have their opinions heard. I think the fundamental thing about it is that, or at least the really interesting thing about it, is that it is sort of a Main Street populist uprising, such as it is. It's just as you can do with stocks. So basically, hedge fund investors have been, betting that this company GameStop, which sells video games, will keep losing money and go down. It will basically be worthless. And so GameStop has seen its revenue decline year over year over year. And so they were betting that it would keep going down. So they did these things called short selling. And so that's how you sort of bet something goes down. And all of these day traders on Reddit over the course of 2 years, but it's picked up dramatically recently, said, wait a minute, A, this company isn't necessarily as bad as Wall Street's saying it is. B, Wall Street is making this huge outsized bet that's going to go down. If we band together, we can, get this stock up and really hurt these Wall Street guys. And so that sort of has happened. And, speaking in generalities. And so that's basically what's happened. And a lot of these hedge funds have lost a lot of money, and this company is sort of skyrocketing. I mean, I think everyone can sort of get behind that sort of populist revolt against Wall Street and the banks, especially coming out of 2008. But for your listeners and viewers, I just really want to, as Forbes advisor, I know we've sort of gone on this tangent, but this is a complete speculative bet. Speculation is a fun thing to do, but it should be with money that you're comfortable losing completely. So do not do this with any sort of money that's important to you. This isn't really investing. Investing is like, the long-term accumulation of assets
Got it.
Yeah, like long term, and this is the exact opposite of that. So
Yeah.
it's a fascinating thing to watch.
I
But I think it sort of shows the environment that we're in.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding. Everybody's just kind of juggling thoughts every single day. And I guess since you spoke about that, we talked about past presidents and each with such a different path in their history. What do we take now? Can we learn something from our past to move forward?
Yes, I think
Good. Otherwise, we're all in trouble.
we're all doomed.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, let's get some silver linings going. I
Mhm.
think the first thing we can do is pat ourselves on the back. You know, we
Ah,
came into let's do that. Let's the sort of the natural inclination of a lot of people is to be very like dour and moribund. Let's be a little let's raise our shoulders a little bit, pick up our chin, and say, the average person has behaved very well during this terrible crisis. People have been stuck at home, kids have been deprived of schooling. It's been a very, very hard time. And as it relates to finances, we've done relatively well. Like the government spent a lot of money to give it to us directly, and that really helps. So like, let's applaud the government, and we've learned that lesson. And so in the future, let's build on that. The next time there's this type of crisis, hopefully not another pandemic, but the next time there's a recession or this big event, one of the big issues was that while the money that they passed in those stimulus bills was great, it got to people too slowly.
yeah.
So let's improve, the unemployment system so that it makes more sense. There's more cohesion across the 50 states. It's easier to sign up. It's less confusing, and people can get their money faster. The same thing with the stimulus checks. It takes way too long for money to go from the federal government into my bank account, and banks can use that delay to take up or charge me fees if I don't have enough money, insufficient fund fees if I don't have enough money in my account, waiting on that check.
There.
Exactly. It's my money. It should be there. It takes too long. So let's make the banks post that money faster. Let's make the infrastructure of this money work a little better. I think that will really help. As it comes to sort of investing, again, I think we did very, very well. We didn't, all these research from different sources show that investors didn't really sell. We didn't like sell our 401ks. People haven't even really borrowed from their 401ks, even though the government reduced some of the penalties involved with that. So we've done a very good job of sort of keeping with what we're supposed to be doing and not panicking and not looking at our portfolios when money goes down. But I think the thing that we can sort of learn from this is that this was a huge emergency, right? This is something that was completely unforeseen. So let's do a very good job of building up our savings over the next, so that we can deal with the next crisis. Let's make it part of our natural inclination as human beings that when we get a paycheck, we save 10% of it. And then we craft the rest of our life around that around the 90%. Let's make if we do that and we have this, emergency fund and we're able to save for retirement, we know that when there's a big crisis, we'll have a little bit of a cushion. So let like COVID be our lesson that something really big and dramatic can happen to all of us outside of our control, outside of our planning. And we need to do certain small things to help us deal and prepare for that. So I think that we've done very well, and this is how we can sort of push it forward.
So you're making us feel better, but you're also giving us something to do as we step forward.
Yeah, gotta sandwich it. That's what I do with my kids,
Oh.
Clean up your room and you get some dessert.
It sounds perfect. And I love that you brought up the idea of just a simple reminder to save money. I think we really pay the bills, check to check a lot of the time. And it is just finding those little resources you can tuck away, because much like maybe our grandparents did,
Yeah.
figured it out, and now it's up to us to do the same.
Yeah. And get creative with it, like our grandparents use envelopes and tin cans, and you don't have to do all that stuff, but like find your own idiosyncratic way to put a little money aside each time, and I think it can start feeling really good, and just get used to living on the little bit of less money, so that way whenever anything happens, you don't feel like you're making a big sacrifice.
Right. And then when we can get back to normal, people will be ready to do it for sure.
Exactly.
Any
Exactly.
last thoughts for everybody listening and watching, Taylor?
I think I will. This is my soapbox. This is my soapbox time.
Okay.
I think that I think so. So let's take GameStop real quickly. So GameStop, one of the things that I think our readers and your viewers and all the people sort of interested in this stuff, the reason they're sort of, or one of the reasons they're interested in GameStop or Bitcoin or when the stock market's going crazy, is they sort of feel a sense of being left out, and they're like, Bitcoin's doing this thing, GameStop's doing this thing, the stuff's going on. These people out there have this special knowledge and they're making money and I'm not making money. Wouldn't my life be better if I can make money? And I wish I could do that. And I would just caution people against that kind of feeling. Like don't have FOMO, fear of missing out.
Very good.
When you see these things, these are just very odd, strange things. Most of us can't and don't want to risk a lot of money that can be lost tomorrow on these things, getting over our skis, not knowing exactly what we're doing. So, just look at it. It's interesting, read about it, but try and not have an emotional reaction to it where you think that you yourself have done something wrong.
Oh, wonderful. This is why we're talking to you, Taylor. This is Taylor Tepper. He is an investing and retirement analyst with Forbes Advisor. And I cannot thank you enough, Taylor, for joining us for our PennyWise podcast from Lee Enterprises. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, I look forward to talking to you again in maybe another 100 days or so, and we'll check in on
Oh, let's make the thing.
That sounds wonderful. Taylor, thank you again.
Bye.